This is a story called The Expensive Diary. Retirement suited Gerald. It suited him very much. 40 years it had been, 40 long years, and many changes along the way. Selling insurance had been tricky at first. Gerald hadn't been a natural salesman, especially not in insurance. He'd never seen the point himself. He didn't break things, he didn't crash things, and so far he hadn't died unexpectedly. But others seemed to need the insurance, wanted assurance that whatever it was they loved for, or cared for, or relied upon was covered. It could at the very least be replaced or have a monetary value given instead if and when accidents happen, and life is continually full of little accidents, isn't it? Although, as it happened, not for Gerald. No, Gerald had had a charmed life. He sat there now in his brand new flat, sipping a glass of single malt whisky, looking back, and he couldn't think of a single mishap that had befallen him. It was as if his life had been guided by an unseen hand. Yet he wasn't particularly religious and couldn't remember when he last set foot in a church, but he always made a point of giving to charities and carol singers, although thinking about it he couldn't remember the last time carol singers came a-knocking, let alone singing, or what he might have given them. But he would have given them something. He was that sort of man. It had to be that had charmed his life, that and paying all his bills on time. Gerald was nothing if he wasn't punctual. The cheque-book was out the moment the letter demanding money dropped onto the mat. Often, within the very hour that the bill was received, his stamped envelope and cheque were slipped into the postbox at the end of the street, and that little matter resolved. It was rare, though it had happened, that a telephone call, a kindly voice on the other end of the receiver, would inquire, ever so politely, whether Mr. Trudshaw, had forgotten to settle an account. He was normally so prompt, you see, and the embarrassment, the profuse apologies, the promises that it would never happen again, and the reassurances that it really didn't matter. But no. How terrible of me to forget. Let me pay you something on account to make up for it. To resolve that nothing so dreadful should ever happen again, Gerald kept a diary. Not so much kept, for he already had a diary, a works diary for all his appointments, his sales appointments, his contacts' names and addresses, his customers' accounts. He just added to that the dates that the unexpected bills or the expected bills were likely to arrive. But now that he was retired, it suddenly occurred to him that he had no such diary, for there were no such appointments. There were no customers, no insurance to sell, no need to leave his house other than for pleasure or shopping. Gerald put down the whisky glass and considered the point. He would go out first thing in the morning to town. He would make a special trip to the stationer's. He knew the one, the place on St. Peter's Avenue, and he would buy one, a nice new diary. And true to his word, he did. And it was a lovely diary. Brown, leather-bound, about A5 in size, beautifully printed on quality paper, with a little tube for a pen. A fountain pen, in fact, which he bought too. It was expensive, there was no doubt about that. He wouldn't normally have been quite so carefree with his money, but the salesman had been good. He'd been very good, very persuasive. More than was necessary, Gerald thought. He was there in the stationer's to buy a diary, an ordinary, small, inexpensive diary, nothing fancy, but he walked out with a lavish private notebook kind of diary. And a ruddy pricey pen too, and cartridges of ink, loads of them, and various colours. There were packets of the blasted things. More ink that he could ever use, even if he lived for another 40 years, scribbling such reminders as phone bill, gas bill, paper, milk, bowls club membership, chimney sweep, and carol singers. Really, there'd been no need to have been quite so persuasive. Insistent even. Perversely so, in fact. The more Gerald thought about it, the more cross he became. Blast that salesman, all smooth talking and slick, the pitch down pat, the hand gently but firmly placed on the shoulder at the appropriate moment, the colourful descriptive language, carefully manipulating images, conjuring up the endless advantages of owning a wonderful diary. His vanity played on, his ego massaged, until he, Gerald, star insurance salesman of 40 years, felt he couldn't live without the leather diary, which, now that he examined the wretched thing, it wasn't leather at all. Perhaps leatherette or leather-like or leather imitation, maybe vegan leather, simulated leather, leather look, pretend leather, anything you bloody well like, but actually straight off the back of a cow or a bull or a giraffe for all he cared, but real leather. And the pen. Look at the thing, fat and gaudy with a ridiculous gold band in the centre, pretentious rubber grip halfway down. There was nothing beautiful about it whatsoever. In fact, it was rather ugly. It was the most ugliest thing that Gerald had the misfortune to see. Hideous lump of cheap mass-produced pap. With further examination, the shoddy thing didn't even fit into the fake leather tubular pen holder anyway. This was too much. It had been too expensive and it wouldn't do. Gerald was not going to enter anything into that god-awful excuse of a diary, least of all the reminders of payments due. He stormed back to the shop that very day. "Take this rotten rubbish back," he demanded, thrusting the hideous book and pen into the sales assistant's hand. "I want a simple, inoffensive diary, cheap as chips." Well, it has to be said the salesman was most gracious, very apologetic. Gerald could see that. The fellow was hurt, even. There were tears, certainly water was welling, if not actually seeping out of the poor man's eyes, after Gerald had voiced his anger at being sold such an inferior piece of detritus. And he, Gerald, was refunded, without hesitation, no argument at all. The seller had opened the till and given him the correct money. In nice crisp notes, too. He even offered to let Gerald keep the pen as a gesture of goodwill, and the ink, all of it. But no, Gerald didn't need a pen, nor copious amounts of coloured ink, just a plain, simple pocket diary, so that he could keep a firm hand on all the bills when they came in. He loved to be in control and to settle matters, quickly and efficiently. The salesman bowed and presented him with just the thing, neat, trim and small. It cost less than a shilling and was perfect in every way. Heading home, Gerald congratulated himself on his handling of the situation. His years of experience in the game had shown the blighter who was boss. And arriving home, he found the postman busy stuffing envelope after envelope into his letterbox. "Hello? What's all this?" Gerald asked, somewhat perturbed. "Oh, sorry, mate," said the postman. "Looks like you forgot to set up a forwarding address to your new flat. Here's a load of brown envelopes from a few months ago. Quite a lot of final demands, I'm afraid, there, by the looks of things. You really should have notified us earlier to redirect the mail. I hope you've got deep pockets." Gerald threw the wretched diary down the stairwell and clasped his head in his hands and let out a rather loud, long wail.